Alright guys, today I will teach you how to play gauntlets in 10 minutes or less. Now what will this guide cover? Well, we're going to go over the strengths, some approach options, all the true combos, strings, reads, some legend specifics, and also some matchup tips at the end. So if you guys want to see all of that, stay tuned till the end of the video. Now, I'm also going to link some guides to other creators like PAVELSKI and PHAZON who have made good guides and specifics about gauntlets. So I'll link those too if you guys want to see those. Now, in order to meet this time constraint of 10 minutes, I think the best thing I could do is get started. So let's start with the strengths of gauntlets. Gauntlets have great string potential, they're amazing offstage, and they have great mobility and speed. A lot of the moves have low startup, so you're going to be able to throw them out really fast and not get punished for them. Now let's talk about some things to keep in mind. Gauntlets struggle to kill, especially after the Endlight nerf. Endlight no longer is a good kill option, so you're basically left with having to read your opponent in order to kill them, or you're left with D-Light into recovery, which is a true combo at late HP, but also hard to hit and very situational. Basically, overall, gauntlets struggle to kill. Now, they also have low range, so weapons like bow will easily beat them out, but this can be an advantage to gauntlets because you could get into the dead zone of specific weapons like blasters, which we'll talk about later, and that could be beneficial to you in that certain specific matchup. So theoretically, the low range of gauntlets is kind of not that bad of a thing for them. So there's really not that many drawbacks to playing gauntlets, so you guys should play them, you know? Alright, so now let's talk about your main approach options, those being D-Light, Sidelight, and Nair. D-Light has low startup time and leads into various true combos. Sidelight carries your opponent into the air and sets you up for huge string potential. And then you also have Nair, which is a really spammable option with tons of drift to catch your opponent off guard. One thing to keep in mind with all of these approach options is they can become predictable really fast. So something that you could do to switch up your options is utilize movement to your advantage, right? So one time you might come in with a Sidelight and it'll hit. And then the next time, instead of Sidelighting, use your dash canceling or use the dash back instead to bait out your opponent and go for a punish. Alright, so let's go over your true combos now. All your true combos basically revolve around D-Light. So you have D-Light into Dare, into Sidelight, into Nair, into Endlight, and also into Recovery at late HP. And also you kind of have to be stacked for that one a bit. Now, you also have a true combo off Nair, which is a GC Endlight. And this is like the bread and butter. You guys got to get this one down. A lot of people, you're going to be put in a lot of situations where you have to use this true combo. Because Nair is so spammable, so you'll be hitting it a lot, right? So knowing GC Endlight as a follow-up and a true combo, you want to be able to learn that. And of course, you also have GC D-Light into Nair and GC D-Light into Recovery. Now I'm going to go over the common strings for D-Light and Sidelight mainly, just for the sake of time, and what is mostly used by people who play gauntlets. Alright, so let's start with Sidelight. So off of Sidelight, you have Recovery, which is a common kill option. And you also have Nair, which sets you up for plenty more options. So off of Nair, you could either go for a GC D-Light, or a GC Sidelight, or a Dare. You also have the option to go for a Side Air. If you hit the GC D-Light, you have an option to go for a Recovery, or a Nair. If you hit the GC Sidelight, you also have an option for a Recovery or a Nair. That's basically everything off the Sidelight. Now let's say your opponent's on the edge. You have two options here if they don't have a dodge. You have a D-Light into Ground Pound, and a D-Light into Side Air. Also, if your opponent doesn't have a dodge, off Dare, you could hit a Recovery. Now this only kind of works in late HP. At earlier HP, you won't be able to get that Recovery, so keep that in mind. Alright, now let's go over some common dodge reads off Sidelight, Down Air, and Endlight. So off Sidelight, if your opponent spot dodges, you could Sidelight, touch the ground, read the dodge with the Nair, GC D-Light, reverse Nair, Ground Pound into Recovery for a full damage cycle. If your opponent directionally dodges, you hit a Sidelight, and then GC Sidelight in either direction and recover. You also have the option for a Sidelight, delayed Side Air. And the reason this might be beneficial is because it sends your opponent off stage and you preserve your dodge. However, it sets you up for a lot less, so keep that in mind. You also have a Sidelight Drift Nair, which is another good option that I use. A lot less common though. If your opponent dodges up off Sidelight, you have Sidelight Recovery, Sidelight Jump Nair. In the scenario of your opponent not actually dying to a normal recovery, the best option if they dodge up and you notice that they're dodging up is to chase them up, GC Sidelight, and recover again off the top. Now if your opponent dodges down, you have a few options. You could either Sidelight and fast fall into a recovery, or you could Sidelight, touch the ground, and Sidelight again. Alright, now let's talk about off Down Air. So if your opponent spot dodges or dodges down off Down Air, you have Down Air into Ground Pound into Recovery. This is kind of a call out, but it is a lot of damage. You also have the option to dash into a Sidelight and follow up from there. Now if your opponent dodges up, you of course have Down Air into Recovery. And if they dodge in either direction, you have down air, GC side light, recovery. Off end light, if your opponent dodges in or spot dodges, you have end light into chase dodge, reverse side light, and that follows you up for more options. Now if your opponent dodges up, you have end light into reverse snare, end light into dare. If your opponent dodges away, you have end light into chase dodge, side light, recovery. You could also do an end light into dash jump, GC D light, which sets you up for both recovery and nair. Alright, now let's talk about some legend specifics. So some tech on Wushang is to do a dare into D-Sig. A lot of people will fall for this, and once they actually start adapting to it is when you kind of could change your options up. But it does work the first couple of times against a lot of players. They will either fast fall or dodge down into it. Another option you have is a side light into GC D-Sig, and this works to catch spot dodge. Also works as a dodge down read. Also, when your opponent is damaged and they don't have a dodge, you could go for a D-Light end sig, which is unjumpable. Petra also has some cool tech. You have side light into GC end sig for either direction. And you also have side light, chase dodge down, end sig for dodge down, or spot dodge. And you also have GC end sig for if they dodge up, but it's kind of like you have to hit it in a certain way. When it comes to matchups, gauntlets are good into weapons like greatsword, blasters, lance, and spear. And it's because gauntlets could get into the dead zones of these weapons. As you know, gauntlets are like a really short range weapon. So if you could hover around someone and kind of play within their dead zones, it's really good for that. Alright, now debatably the worst matchup for gauntlets is going to be Katars. And that's because they have high priority. And I'll also would avoid all like offstage interaction with Katars, unless it's to confirm a kill. Because Katars win that matchup 9 out of 10 times. And you'll also notice gauntlets get beat out by bow, and that's because bow has an extensive range. And bow also has an answer for someone being right on top of them, right? Like they have nair, which hits right on top, and they have end light. So there's not really a good dead zone for gauntlets to play within bow. Alright, now I'm going to briefly discuss gauntlets offstage. So gauntlets offstage kind of comes down to just knowing where your opponent is. If your opponent's above you, you have nair as an option. And if your opponent's below you, you have ground pound, you have side air, and you have even weapon throw, which you could implement, and it's actually really useful to implement offstage. You also have to mix up your options and not be too predictable, and also not overextend. But overall, once you start connecting your gauntlet moves offstage, it's pretty much over for your opponent, and gauntlets are really good at taking away their recovery options, so yeah, it's not too hard to play gauntlets offstage, that's for sure. Alright, so I hope this guide was helpful for you guys. If you want more fast-paced content and guides like this that teach you things in a really short amount of time, feel free to comment what you want and I'll get to it. So yeah, make sure you guys subscribe and like the video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace!